Hi, folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is Season 17, Episode 2. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we go. Great to have you with me once again, coming at you not live from my living room. Hope that you're keeping well in all the madness. I wonder what the next few weeks will hold every time I sit down to do one of these. It's like, are we really any further forth? But anyway, we'll see. Just got to play it a week at a time, haven't we? So we were talking about retirement planning in this whole season. I kind of set the stall out last week. But transitioning into retirement is a big deal. I mean, it's a momentous occasion. Obviously it is. Of course, for many of us, though, it's an occasion which is spread over months or years if we decide we're going to opt for like a gradual move away from working to live. But there will come a time when you find yourself retired, whatever that means for you. And today I want to kind of look at what that means, how you might be feeling, plus what you should think about now. Okay, so that's where we're going today. After the main body of the show, as usual, I'll look at a review that's been left, announce what we're going to be talking about next week. But before any of that, as always, this podcast is brought to you with the help of my friends at Seven Investment Management. They've been helping me out here on Meaningful Money for ages, right back from spring 2011. So we're now closing in on 10 years, which is amazing. So I'm obviously really grateful to them for their ongoing support. Please do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. Now, in the last episode of Season 16, I'll put a link to that in the notes, I talked about making the leap. That was the title of that episode. Now, I'm really conscious I don't want to overlap with that session because it's very recent. So definitely listen back to that if you haven't already. Link in the notes. So today I want to kind of consider more the psychological response to retiring, not obviously from the perspective of an actual psychologist. You only have to have listened to 5 minutes of this show to know that I'm certainly not that, but really from the perspective of having walked through the process of retiring with countless clients over the years. I've obviously learned some things. So today's show isn't so much everything you need to know followed by everything you need to do, which is the usual format if you're new here. It's more a kind of collection of lessons I've learned vicariously, if you like, through my clients. Even though I'm grey, I'm not retired yet. So I hope that some of the stories resonate, make you think, and maybe there's some stuff you can apply to what you're going through if you're at that life stage. So as ever, remember, notes and links from today's show, they're at the show notes, which is the only link you need to remember. So if you're getting a little bit more government-sanctioned exercise than usual and you're out and about listening to this, then this is the only link you need to remember. You don't need to write it down. meaningfulmoney.tv/RP2. That's for retirement planning, episode 2. meaningfulmoney.tv/RP2. Let's get into the body of the show. Okay, so first thing to be aware of, first thing to remember when you go into retirement is that you are still you, okay? I spend a whole lot of my time, most of my working time, planning clients' transition into retirement. That just seems to be the area where we tend to have the most input. So if in completing that work, we've got to talk about spending patterns, and not if, we obviously have to. Ultimately, as I've said many times on here, financial success comes down to cash flow, right? I'm going to say a bit more about that a bit later. Cash flow is money in and money out, and so we need to know what expenses are. Some clients have got a really good handle on their finances. They know to the penny what gets spent on electricity or food or fuel. Others only really have a general sense. Now, when we ask our clients to complete an expenditure sheet, the response we get tells us a great deal about the client. Some clients sort of light up, their eyes light up and they crack open their spreadsheet and they start transferring figures. Others just kind of ask if they can round their expenses to the nearest 500 quid a month or sometimes the nearest £1,000 a month, seriously. But as I've completed retirement financial plans for hundreds of clients, I've noticed one thing, it's always the case. People don't change when they hit retirement, even if they think they might. And often they fear that they will change somewhat, which I find really interesting. But if people are in control of their spending before retirement, they will be afterwards. I have never yet the person who, drove sensible cars while working. I've never met that person who suddenly develops a penchant for Bentleys in retirement. Okay, if you're used to taking fairly normal holidays, generally speaking, you don't start taking mega 5-star round world cruises at 50,000 quid a pop. While retirement is a massive change, remember, you are the constant through it all, and you just won't change fundamentally. I've often thought, I don't know about you, if you have a little bit too much alcohol, it kind of brings out an exaggerated version of many people because they're no longer limited by sort of social inhibition. In a similar way, retirement can bring out a different side of people, or it's sort of an exaggerated sense of themselves by giving them perhaps the time to indulge in some of the passions more completely. But they are still the same people underneath, and hopefully that's encouraging. It's weird that people think somehow they're going to change when they retire, but generally speaking, they don't. All the skills and practical application that you brought to bear to get yourself to the point at which you can retire doesn't just desert you when you wake up on your first day as a retired person. Okay, you are still you. That said, though, sometimes transitions do have an effect on people. A particular example comes to mind of a couple who never really managed their finances that well. Excuse me. Fortunately for them, she inherited from her mother right as they were at the cusp of retirement. And this inheritance was the reason they were referred to me. So it's fair to say that this inheritance was perfectly timed. It absolutely transformed their retirement, made it a really good one. Without it, they probably would have had to sell their home to support their lifestyle fairly quickly. In this case, I was a bit worried because the initial signs were that they would sort of continue their general lack of spending control. But actually they managed to rein things in pretty well, but only after I showed them that the trajectory wasn't great, even after the inheritance. So easy to think when a lump sum of money comes in that, oh, that's it, now we've got all we ever need. But as you'll see, it's a bit more than that. It's about more than that. For this couple, they realised actually they'd been thrown a bit of a financial lifeline by this inheritance, and they were determined to make sure that they can enjoy the money indefinitely and not just at an artificially high level, but for a shorter period of time. And so they effectively changed their spending patterns, and they're far happier for it. They've still got a much better retirement than they would have had without the inheritance. So in this case, the clients did change, having said that people generally don't change as they sort of transition into retirement. That is unusual, and I like to think that I had a hand in that change because through the financial planning process, I was able to help them see what lay ahead. So people don't change generally as they transition into retirement, but sometimes that transition can maybe nudge them towards usually a better way of behaving towards their money, not least because they realize that they're not going to earn anymore, potentially, so they need to look after what they've got. Third lesson, arguably one of the most pivotal, what kind of a word is that? One of the most pivotal lessons in my career really came from not understanding the difference between working and retirement. Now, I'll explain about that. So, a particular client I'm thinking of had a very successful business. He had built it over many decades. He was in his late 50s and he retired very well, multiple 7 figures in the bank. Now, I had inherited this client from a retired colleague of mine. So he'd been a client of my firm for quite a long time, but it was one of my colleagues that was looking after him. And because I took him over, I treated it as if he was a brand new client. Obviously went through all the right compliance procedures, doing all the fact finding, because this was definitely a major transition and a transition to a new advisor at the firm, me. So we had him complete the risk questionnaire, all the stuff we have to do to make sure that the money he was asking us to invest would be done correctly. Now, he had invested before, but never really large amounts. His business had always been his largest asset. And now that was turned into cash, of course. He didn't have a business anymore. He had a lot of money in the bank. Now, this guy was an entrepreneur, right? And at the time, I kind of equated that with risk taking. Maybe you would do the same. You kind of think, okay, entrepreneur, running your own business, there's risk involved there. So maybe this person's got a particular risk appetite. In this case, it seemed to confirm, it certainly seemed to bear out that, because his answers to our risk questionnaire, he came out sort of balanced to moderately adventurous, call it a 6 to 7 out of 10, certainly on the higher side without being stupidly risk tolerant. So we had £1 million to invest of his multi-million-pound payout. And it was, though I say it myself, immaculately constructed as a portfolio. All the right tax wrappers for his circumstances. And this was in early 2007. Of course, you know what happened in the couple of years after that. The great financial crisis hit, and he watched the value of his portfolio fall. Not a great deal at first, and actually, he never declined in value more than 12%. That was the worst point that it got to. But by the time the autumn of 2008 came around, when we had Lehman Brothers and it was looking pretty bleak, he would be on the phone for an hour a day talking to me, seeking constant reassurance. Obviously, it's my job to do that. But in the end, he cracked and he sold out of his investment, placing the money into cash. He just couldn't hack the investment ups and downs anymore. Now, he put some of that cash where? Into one of the Icelandic banks. And those of you that were around in 2008 and were interested in this stuff then know that a lot of the Icelandic banks failed thanks to a ludicrous decision by the UK government. So, the bank failed, took his money with it. Now, in the end, he got it all back. There is a somewhat happy ending. But I suppose the lesson that I learned in it all, arguably the biggest lesson I've ever learned in my career, was that I ought never to have equated this man who had built a business with risk-taking by default. And it was a question of control. You see, he had always been in control of his business, this business that he had built. And suddenly he had no control at all over the directions of the markets and the economy and all that sort of stuff. And that was just too much. The lack of control completely freaked him out. So in it all, I learned how to be a much better advisor, much better at talking about risk with the clients that I build portfolios for, much better at talking clients through the potential implications of their decisions. Now, for you listening or watching this, given the timing of this season as well, we're right in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, just in case you happen to be watching this 5 years into the future, you need to understand the implications of any decisions you make at retirement, and particularly investment decisions. But also, you need to understand the difference between working and retiring. Suddenly, you're retired, you're not earning anymore, you're not building any more wealth, you are actually spending it. If you're doing your job right, you should be actually reducing the value of your investments by means of spending it and enjoying it. And that does require a completely different viewpoint from a wealth building mentality. So easily the most pivotal decision in my career, the most pivotal experience, should I say, in my career, still makes me go cold a little bit at the whole thought of it. But for you, it's really important. Investing in retirement is different to when you're working, and your approach and attitude towards your money should be different too. Lesson number four, if you like, is that cash flow is still all important, right? There are quite a few universal truths when it comes to money. I like to spout them regularly. One of them is that cash flow is king, and that is still true, arguably even more so in retirement. It's obvious, really. If you're spending more than is coming in, then you're going to have to dip into capital to make up the difference. Usually, those of us in retirement, obviously, we're not going to get a promotion. We're not going to start earning any more or whatever, as a general rule. And so you know what's coming in. If your expenses are more than that, then you're going to need to dip into capital. And that is fine. Okay, that is absolutely fine. I have no issue with erosion of capital as long as you've got capital from which to draw. And as long as you don't draw down too quickly so that the capital runs out altogether. One example of clients really not understanding this was a couple that I met. They were in their early 50s. Now, by any measure, this couple were wealthy. They got 4 properties, including 2 in London. Money in the bank, good pension funds, and he was earning £250,000 a year while he was working, and they had the lifestyle to match it. And they told me when we were doing their planning that they wanted to spend £10,000 a month throughout their retirement, okay? And they wanted to retire now, early 50s, right? By any measure, they were wealthy, and they thought that they had all the money they needed. Well, we ran the numbers, and I had to tell them that they were going to run out of money probably by the time they were 71, 72. Well, they just went white when I told them. They couldn't believe it. They'd sort of psyched themselves up to retire now, thought that they had all the money they'd ever need. But actually, they were very property rich, and not quite, by any measure, they were rich in sort of liquid assets terms. But if you retire in your early 50s and want to spend 10 grand a month, you have to have a lot of money, right? And for them, the big issue was that they didn't want to sell any of their properties. And I just told them, well, look, you'll have to. Unless you dial back your spending, I believe the number in their case was they'd need to spend about 20% less than they thought they wanted to. They would need to sell properties. But of course, they didn't want to spend less either, right? So they had to find a balance. And in the end, actually, the company that he worked for got bought out. He had a big windfall, and it ended up being fine. But they have still reined in their spending. But it isn't just about capital. It's about cash flow as well and managing your spending no matter how rich you are, right? And these people couldn't get their heads around the fact that they had to spend less, even though by any measure they were wealthy people. Another example of just how important cash flow is, this is kind of almost a reverse example. In this client, I had a client couple. They had a seaside property. Obviously, we're down here in Cornwall. It was very near to their home, and it was a successful holiday let. And they'd run it as a holiday let for decades. And it was earning them, by the time they sold it, about 28 grand a year profit, this holiday let. But they were grafting every Saturday to change it over for the incoming guests, a couple in their mid-70s, right? Doing changeovers every single Saturday morning for 30 to 35 weeks of the year, okay? So in the end, they sold the property. Mid-70s they were in, right? They bought this property back in the 80s for like Tuppence Halfpenny or something, and they sold it for £900,000, okay? But a few weeks later, I got an exasperated call from the gentleman of the couple asking to come in and see me. And it turned out that his wife was really worried that they weren't going to be able to manage without the income from the property. Now, you're doing mental arithmetic in your heads listening to this. Obviously, yes, they'd lost the income, but now they had a chunk of money in the bank, even allowing for capital gains tax, right? And even if they put the sale proceeds under the mattress, took 28,000 quid a year out of it to spend, they would have the best part of 30 years worth of income that they could draw from the capital, enough to take them both way past age 100. So they came into my office, and I somehow managed to get this across to her finally, and she literally, I kid you not, she wept with relief in my office. It really was the strangest thing. Now, this is not a woman who's thick or mathematically deficient. She's a very strong, intelligent woman, been through an incredible amount in her life, quite the matriarch, running the family, grandkids and great-grandkids, all sorts of stuff. So, she'd run the holiday let business, entirely financially switched on. And yet, for her, the cash flow of the income coming in was everything. She just couldn't get her head around it being somehow replaced or repackaged as capital rather than income. So cash flow is still king, even in retirement. Just remember that cash flow isn't income. Exactly. Not just that. It can come from capital too, and it is okay to erode capital. Okay, lesson number 5. You need to try and eliminate money worries, or perhaps to put it another way, eliminate the amount of mental energy that it takes to run your money. You want to sort of eliminate as much of the day-to-day worry and bother about money as you can. So you want to set things up so that you can spend as little time thinking about the practical application of your finances as possible. And the best example I've ever seen of this is a client that came to me just a couple of years ago. She'd been referred to me by another advisor, and that advisor was now retired. So the client is a lady in her mid-70s, and she keeps, I kid you not, right, £250,000 in her instant access savings account, getting next to no interest. Now, you're listening to the Meaningful Money podcast. I know what you're thinking. That makes no financial sense whatsoever. And even if she put 50 grand of it in premium bonds, she would probably do better than that. So when I first met her, I was sort of about to start talking about alternatives. Really, that's a lot of money to leave in cash. She didn't even give me a chance. She looked me right in the eyes and said, "That is my sleep at night money. It never leaves that account." Now, I was being asked to advise on the investment of the other half of her life savings, the sort of 250 grand or so that was invested with the help of the now retired advisor rather. So my client said to me, look, she was happy to have the invested portion of her wealth put to work because she knew that the money in the bank was all that she would need for the rest of her life. For her, the peace of mind brought by having admittedly such a crazy amount of money in the bank meant that she didn't give the invested portion a moment's thought. Now that's a good lesson, if a little bit of an extreme one. How can you set things up so that you don't actually think much about your finances day to day? I still definitely don't recommend that you keep that much money in the bank though, but how can you set things up to give yourself the mental space to enjoy life and not spend time unnecessarily thinking about your finances? Number 6, retirement is a long time. Okay, when planning for retirement, we're hopefully talking about planning for a long time, 30 years ideally, if not longer. And it's important to retain that context when you're planning, and particularly in the early stages of retirement. I've got one client couple who recently retired, and obviously now their pensions and investments have been hit by the market falls triggered by the coronavirus. So we jumped on a planning call. They're going to be fine, and they've set things up really, really well with lower risk investments for their nearer term money, more adventurous investments for money they won't be touching for ages. Textbook. Another client couple that I've got, they've been dithering about investing for ages. They retired back to the UK from abroad in their mid-70s. They're now in their early 80s. They had a lump sum from a source that I can't remember, and I came up with a plan for investing it carefully 6 years ago. Again, they've got great income. They don't actually need the money. So far, they've only put in about a quarter of what they were planning to do. For ages, they were worried that the market was too high and it was due a correction, so they were going to wait until the market corrected to invest. They were obviously right about that, but now the market has corrected, they're worried about investing in case it goes down further. Now, this is a couple, they're both well, they're hale and hearty, they don't need the money that they're planning to invest. They should have invested 6 years ago. They would still been well in profit even after the recent falls. Retirement is a long time. Generally, your money will have time to recover from any market falls, and if you set things up correctly with shorter term, very short term money in cash, shorter term money in sort of cautious investments, and then the money you're not going to touch for a while in more risky investments, that will serve you very well. We really must try not to think short term, even in retirement when it comes to your money. You might be in the last phase of your financial life, but all being well, it should still be a multi-decade phase, and you should invest accordingly. Really, really important. I consider it a bit of a failure, actually, that I haven't got that second couple to invest, but, it's their money. Number 7, enjoy life now. I can give you at least 4 examples in just the last couple of years of ladies who have lost their husbands way too soon into retirement. I guess it's just maths, of all the couples who retire together, some will have a tragically short time together before one of them dies. One lady lived in probably the most incredible house I've ever been in, and I've been in some amazing properties in my career. Yet there was a real air of sadness about the place. There was a picture of her late husband by the door. And they had spent years planning this property, and he died suddenly, just 6 months after moving in. And there are loads of examples in my career of things like this happening, and the simple lesson from it is this: enjoy life now. Don't wait. Don't overthink the long-term implications of taking that big holiday. Sure, plan for it. Don't be rash, but don't put it off, because time is short, sometimes shorter than we think. And finally, share the load. One other theme that has come out of helping so many widows after losing their husbands, and in the other way around, some cases, is that leaving your partner unprepared financially adds a massive amount of hardship at the worst possible time. Easily the worst example of this was when a lady in a client couple had the quickest onset vascular dementia that I've ever seen. It took 2 weeks for her to go from fully capable to totally losing mental capacity. Now, despite my urging over many years and the same from her family, they'd never quite got round to setting up powers of attorney. The husband of the couple didn't even know the PIN number to their joint bank account ATM card. She used to give him pocket money every week, which he would take out with his friends. He was a financial child, but he was in his late 70s. So he had to grow up pretty quick, and he did with the help of his family, but it would have been much easier had the couple shared the load financially. At the other end of the scale, I've got a client who's left detailed instructions about everything. I've seen the file, and at the front of the file is my business card. Ring Pete, he'll sort you out. So don't risk leaving your partner financially unprepared. It's not just about provision, it's about preparation. Have the conversations that you need to have. Simplify things radically. Write everything down. It'll be a minor pain in the neck compared with the massive suffering inflicted on your partner if you die and they're not financially prepared for it. So we've got 8 lessons there. You're still you. You don't massively change when you retire. Transitions do change some people, but it's rare. Retirement is different to working, and your approach to investing should be different. Cash flow is still all important. eliminate money worries however you can by structuring things to give you the headspace to enjoy life and not just think about the money. Retirement will hopefully be a long time, so you should invest accordingly. Enjoy life now, because you never know quite how long or short your retirement will be. If you're in a couple, and if you are in a couple, make sure you're both prepared financially for one of you dying. So I hope there's some food for thought there. Okay, a little bit of a preach, I suppose, this week, but these are just some lessons as I was chewing over this. Definitely listen back to the Making the Leap podcast from a few weeks ago. There's a link to that in the show notes. Listen to that and this together, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you as you think about transitioning into retirement. And we're going to be obviously adding a whole lot of practical stuff to this over the next few weeks. Okay, we've got a review from Chunk Dem, who titles his or her review, Awesome Podcast Pete. Really liked listening to a few of your recent episodes, so I've started at the start of season 2. Good effort. And I'm planning to work through them all, using your advice to create my financial plans, ready to crack on with implementing soon. Cheers, Pete. Very welcome. Thank you, Chunk Dem. If you like what you're hearing, please leave me a review. meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes if you happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts. But wherever you can listen to me, if you can leave a review, please do. Helps others to hear about the show and to subscribe, because it keeps Meaningful Money near the top of the rankings. Interesting, actually. A bit of a dip in download numbers at the start of the lockdown, simply because people are not commuting. Picked up very nicely though now, and I imagine once the economy starts moving again, it will continue to improve. Crazy now, well over 100,000 downloads a month of the Meaningful Money podcast now. So, the launch of Phase 2 of Meaningful Academy, Build Wealth, was an incredible success. We sort of finished the 2-week launch period on Friday just gone. I closed my laptop for the weekend and sort of enjoyed being with the three-dimensional people instead of looking at my screen seemingly all hours of the day. So thank you to everybody who's joined. It completely exceeded expectations. I hope you're getting loads of value from it if you're on the inside. Build Wealth is open, though. It's not like we've closed it. The first phase, Financial Foundations, is open too. They're open evergreen. And Phase 3, which is going to be called the same as this season, Retirement Planning, that's coming very soon. We're going to be doing a Founders launch in just a few weeks. Now, we've done Founders launch for the previous 2 phases. If you join as a founder, you get a massive discount, usually somewhere near half of what the final pricing will be. And the idea is that you help me shape the content as I add it, which just makes each phase the very best that it can be. So if you want to be kept informed about the launch, head over to meaningfulacademy.com. Click to find out more about retirement planning, and then there's a form there to leave your name and email address, so you'll be the first to know about the Founders launch when it happens. Okay? Brill. Well, next time we're going to be talking about financial housekeeping. All right, practical stuff, making sure things are set up correctly so that you can enjoy life without worrying about the money. One of the lessons from today. So that's where we're going next week. That's it, though, for today's podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Questions or comments, go to the show notes, meaningfulmoney.tv/RP2. Ask them there. I'll do my best to answer. Or you can always join the Facebook group, meaningfulmoney.tv/community, and ask the questions in there. Nearly 4,000 people in there now. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll talk to you next week.